Good evening, all, and a big welcome. I'm Mark Steer. I'm a trustee at Harbour Housing, and I'm the chair of tonight's event. And I thank each one of you for your anticipated contribution and participation. And we have Emily Hill from the Harbour Housing communications team, who is our coordinating things this evening for us. And I'm ably assisted here, and I'm coming from Cosgarn, Harbour Housing's Cosgarn Hall in St Austell this evening. I'm ably assisted by Cicely Barton this evening. So yeah, big welcome. And for those of you that think you're attending something else, now's your time to step out. This is a Hustings event for the candidates for the Devon, Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Police and Crime Commissioner post, hosted by Harbour Housing. And most of us that are observing are very aware of what a Harbour Housing is. But for those of you that may not be overly aware, we provide accommodation support across Cornwall for homeless people and people at risk, and we are underpinned by a alcohol and substance tolerance policy. So, with regard to the post, the Devon and Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Police Commissioner post, following the elections that are due to take place on the 6th of May, alongside the council election process, the successful candidate will embark on a 4-year term of office to ensure policing needs of communities are met, and also, in addition, oversee how crime is tackled. The format for this evening is going to take the form of we have our 4 candidates, and the 4 candidates are, and a big welcome again to you guys, Alison Hernandez, Brian Blake, Gareth Derrick, and Stuart Jackson. And I'm not sure that Stuart's with us just yet, but he's likely to join us if he's not already with us. And so back to the format. To start, each of the candidates will have a 5-minute opportunity to make their opening address and basically set their stall. And this will be followed by a 25-minute slot, whereby 3 preset questions will be asked of the candidates, and each question will be asked of the candidates before we move on to the next question. And then, we're thinking that each candidate will have about 2 minutes to respond to each of those questions. And this will be followed by, this is very much welcomed, questions from the floor. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that section. And then to conclude, each of the candidates will have the opportunity to make their closing remarks. So that's basically the format, and we just need to be aware that the event will be recorded and is likely to be shared at a later date. So I would like to invite each of the candidates to so one at a time, of course, but to start with their opening address. And we've invited people to do that using Christian names first names alphabetically to make it fair. And we are starting with Alison. So Alison Hernandez, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I suppose, firstly, it's important to just note that this next term of office is only 3 years.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, as opposed to, sorry, I've got a message on my screen. I'll mute myself, I've already done that. But this term of office is only 3 years because we've had a delay in the elections. It should have taken place last year, but we've had the pandemic. So we've only got a 3-year term to make a big difference in the next term of office. So I think for that's a challenge in itself in terms of being able to, be ready to run really when you're in this position. I thought I'd focus on firstly is the fact that I think it's fantastic that you've decided to organise this hustings. I think Gareth was just saying as I arrived about how there were loads more hustings in the last election, and this one there's a lot less because of the fact that we can't all get together. But it's great that you've been able to organise this remotely for all of us to be able to participate. And I think what I thought would be helpful to focus on is just to talk about some of the issues around this office and to understand the election as well, so that people can understand how to influence. So firstly, one of the things since I've been here for 5 years is I've put the council tax up by 37% in my term of office. So it's about £60 more people are paying every year towards policing. So if you like, they are the investors that pay for policing, and 40% of all of the policing money is raised through council tax. So just so that you can understand, in an election, what you're trying to do is speak to people who are paying their council tax, disgruntled perhaps that they're paying more in their council tax, disappointed that they don't feel that they might get the value that they think they should get for their money. So it's an interesting conversation in an election. You're talking to those who are investing in policing. So that's why this hustings is really, really vital, to actually be speaking with a different type of audience tonight, in terms of, you know, people who are perhaps in a different position financially and in a different position in terms of their involvement perhaps and their voice in terms of policing. There's a few things that I think has been quite interesting in St Austell, where Harbour Housing is. There's been lots of impressions about, you know, what it is that Harbour Housing offer to people, and I've done all I can to champion the work that you do there, because I fundamentally don't believe in things like consumption rooms. I believe in housing with a policy like you have, where you've got that wider support for those individuals that really need help. I don't believe in just letting them take a drug or have a drink in a room and go away again. I think the housing model is the right approach. And I suppose for how we try and improve the way that we do a lot of the things through policing, we've created now through my office a lived experience scheme. So we recruit people with lived experience to come and work with our office and influence policy. And we've got ex-prisoners who are doing that. We've got ex-victims of domestic abuse. We haven't at the moment got any ex-drug addicts, or even a drug addict at the moment, or an alcoholic. And there is a policy that we could have you involved in some of the setting of the work that happens in the office. And that will continue if I'm re-elected. I think some of the challenges around St Austell, and I'm going to talk about St Austell just a little bit because that's where your main stay is that conversation between what the public see of people who are disadvantaged and struggling in life, and how they react to that in the space of the police and what they do with the police. So for us, I've had it's been quite interesting in this election to actually just speak with and challenge some of the politicians in the St Austell area, including the Member of Parliament, about what the actual scheme that you offer there does for the community and the positive impact that you help those residents achieve in St Austell. So I suppose I wanted to just outline the simplicity about how you can influence a police and crime commissioner. Even once, if it's not me, that policy is still there to involve more lived experience people, and that's an opportunity for you to try and grasp. One of the things that I have tried, and it might be something that you're particularly interested in, is building homes. So one of the things that's been really absolutely clear to me, there is public concern around homelessness, whether it's street homelessness or those that are living in temporary accommodation without their own home. And through a scheme that I've done this year, we've built an eco house in Torquay through the prison system. We've had prisoners at Ley Hill Prison pull together the entire infrastructure of that property. It's then been built on site with the contractor, with people on probation to help them gain some skills. And it's just been completed this week. And I think for us, it's classified as temporary accommodation. And our challenge is getting the funding from the government, because it's not classified as full accommodation. So the funding from the Homes and Communities Agency doesn't quite work. So we've got a bit of a challenge there, but those are beautiful homes that anyone would want to live in. We're just about to put a mum and her baby in there who's come out of care and has nowhere to go. And I think that's the sort of thing that we want to work with you on as a police and crime commissioner and your residents, of how do we create better communities like this that enables people to live some stable lives. I just thought I'd introduce myself with how the influence can work.
Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you very much indeed. And now we move on to Brian Blake. Brian, this is your opportunity. Thank you in anticipation. Brian, you're muted at the moment.
Unmuting.
Oh,
yes.
No, you're unmuted.
I'm unmuted.
Yeah,
right.
You are. Well done. For you, sir.
Well, first of all, to Mark and Emily, thank you for organising this and inviting us, and to the participants, which actually will participate with questions later. I'm the Lib Dem candidate, and this is somewhat of a unique election, in as much as that the candidate who wins has got to share, or swear, I should say, an oath of impartiality, which I take to be no political activity, because you become a public servant. I was ex-copper. I served in this force, and in fact I was stationed in St Austell for about 4 years, so I know the area quite well. I did uniform CID special branch in the regional and national crime squads. Retired as a detective chief inspector, and my wife thought retirement far too good for me, so I had to go and work for the MOD and NATO, mainly in Europe, in a security related role. So I've got extensive experience of dealing with local, national and international crime. I've stood because I've seen a deterioration in the service provided to the public, especially in investigations and visible patrols. And I've dealt with victims and offenders alike, vulnerable people who are out of housing, got drug problems and the like. So I know what the police and public and vulnerable people require of their policing. As Alison knows, it's a requirement of the Code of Conduct for police and crime commissioners to support victim support and safeguarding, and that I see as paramount and an essential function of the police and crime commissioner. In the G7 summit this year at St Ives, there will be some 5,700 police officers deployed down there, and the good citizens of St Ives will probably contrast that with the number of officers they see during a year. And the government funding cuts has taken over 500 officers from this force. And Alison has already mentioned this rise in the police precept to 40% of the budget. And I firmly believe law and order, which is the cornerstone of any society, is the responsibility of government, which they don't seem to be fulfilling. Lastly, the force motto for Devon and Cornwall is Omnium Auxilium, which translates to the assistance of all, or for the assistance of all. And in order to achieve that, there has to be some need to restore policing to the appropriate level on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Brian. That's much appreciated. And Gareth, over to Gareth Derrick now, please.
Thank you very much, Mark and Emily, for this great invitation. And it's a very unique event, and I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks for setting it up. It's unique in a number of ways. Oh, by the way, I'm Gareth Derrick. I'm the Labour Party candidate for Police and Crime Commissioner, in case you hadn't worked that one out. It's unique because I think Harbour Housing is quite unique in many ways, providing those extremely valuable services to people in need of housing for an array of reasons. It's also unique, and I would say brave, because, and Alison referred to it a bit, is that unlike in normal times, this invitation tonight is in fact the only invitation that we've had to conduct a sort of public debate outside of mainstream media. So thank you for that. I'm truly grateful for the chance to hear your views and your residents' views and concerns, and to be able to try and address those as I can too. You'll no doubt hear other candidates saying the same thing, but my pledge is obviously to be working on behalf of all communities here in a really impartial way across Devon and Cornwall in respect of policing and crime prevention. This is probably the most important part of my offer, and I don't take that pledge lightly. The PCC role is about policing and crime prevention. That means keeping people safe from harm. And I know that you, the residents here, have know a lot about harm, and that harm comes in many forms and from many different things and many different people and places. So it's harm, it's distress, it's fear and victimhood where I will need to be focused in my role should I be elected. And that, wherever that comes from, whether it's from the sort of big cyber criminals working internationally, whether it's from gangs thieving from remote farm properties across Devon and Cornwall, or from, if that harm comes from the very system that fails to provide an adequate safety net for people who, for one reason or other, have fallen into difficult times. So wherever that harm comes from, harm reduction, keeping our communities peaceful and safe is my priority. Trying to get our society into that better place is actually why I joined the Labour Party back in 1974, I calculated, when I was 16, and why I rejoined it after my long career in the Royal Navy. This is what the Labour Party is all about. This is why when people say to me that, oh, the role must be impartial, yes, I agree. And that's why I'm standing for election under the banner of the Labour Party, because this is the best way to illustrate my values. And the values I'm talking about our recognition that our country, our communities, our Cornwall will be better if everyone has a better life, not just the lucky few or the wealthy few or the chosen few. And we in the Labour Party are prepared to fight hard for our values too. Being a PCC will not be an easy task because the demands for policing and crime prevention, a bit like those on the NHS, are potentially increasing continuously and get to a point potentially where they are unaffordable. And, you know, this PCC role, Alison Hernandez touched on it earlier as well, has very important taxation and budgetary powers. And that's your money, the money of ordinary taxpayers, and how that is allocated is so important for our society. So I'll need to be asking myself the big questions. Where can the money be best spent to keep our people safe? Where is the money not being spent wisely? What can I do better? Where can savings be made? And it's answering these type of questions that is the very role of a politician and the reason I'm standing here in front of you tonight. Because I'm prepared to give this very important elected role my best shot on behalf of all the people here, whatever your circumstances. My campaign is anchored very much to one big pledge of leadership with integrity. And what does that mean? It means making sure I understand the truth of what is going on here and that I act accordingly. And I won't be deflected from that highest of principles that I'm going to stick to. Thank you again for this, and I look forward to your questions when we get there.
Thank you, Gareth. Thanks very much indeed. And I'm not sure whether we have Stuart with us as yet. Emily, are you able to advise on that?
Hello, I'm
Stuart. Good evening to you. How are you doing? Perfect timing. I'm pleased you had a successful journey. Yeah, big welcome. Stuart, you've missed out on the introductions, but my name is Mark Stuart. I'm the chair of tonight's proceedings, and thank you for your anticipated participation. This is your slot, a sort of 5-minute slot to set out your stall. So please go for it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to set my timer because I haven't timed myself.
Well
Hello,
done.
everyone.
Well done.
My name's Stuart. I'm standing for the Green Party. And first of all, I'd like to just let you know that I've worked over a number of years with a couple of homeless projects for homeless people, one back in Yorkshire where I used to live and one in Exeter. I don't know if any of you have ever lived in Exeter or been homeless in Exeter, but Exeter Cathedral has for a long time run a Wednesday night cafe, and I've helped cook, serve food, and basically chat to people as part of what the cathedral offers to homeless people. I really want to just tell you a story about introduction about Simon. I came home one Tuesday night and saw somebody smoking in my garden. It gave me the fright of my life. It was quite late. Turned out to be Simon, homeless man, who was desperate to find somewhere else to stay apart from the hostel that he'd been staying in until that point. So we talked. He came back a few days later. I gave him breakfast and made him a coffee. And eventually I agreed that he could stay in my garden and sleep in my garden for a while. I actually said, Simon, you're welcome to come and stay every Tuesday night in my garden. I didn't want him staying every night, but you know how it is when you're sleeping rough. It's easy to lose track of days, and he didn't come every Tuesday night, but he turned up every now and again. Simon was very troubled at the time. He was using legal highs, and they were giving him psychosis. He was in trouble with the other homeless people. He was ostracized by the homeless group who were sort of the regulars in Exeter. Therefore, he didn't feel safe to stay in the hostel for all sorts of reasons, because of drug taking in the hostel. Despite the hostel's best intentions, homeless people were smuggling drugs in there. I'm just going to turn off my kettle, which is boiling, which is very loud. Bear with me. Okay, I'm back in the room. So basically, I got to know Simon over a period of years, and now we are friends. Simon is now, he's turned his life around. He's now living in housing association housing. He's living independently. He's living successfully. He's made amends with his sister, who lives in Kent, and he is now a fully functioning member of society, to such an extent that when I was burgled, when I was subject to a violent assault by a drug user who we caught downstairs in our home, Simon actually was able to help us. So in return for the good turn, which I tried to give him by giving him a place to sleep away from the hostel for a few weeks, Simon was able to help us. Now, I'm telling you this story because the very principles of policing, I used to work for Devon and Cornwall Police, the very principles of policing include this one. Police should give impartial service, offering friendship, courtesy, and good humour to all people, regardless of wealth or social status. I imagine that there might be times when you have felt that the police have treated you differently to other members of the public because of your social status, because of your lack of wealth. If you elect me to be Police and Crime Commissioner, I would seek to change that, to take police back to those founding principles. You might have heard the term Bobby, and some of you will know that police were originally called Bobbies because of Robert Peel, or Bobby Peel, who set up the very first police force in London just under 200 years ago. I've been looking very closely at the founding principles of the very first police force, and I would like to improve Devon and Cornwall Police so that they fully uphold those principles. One of those principles is the one that I've just read out. So Simon reminded me that people, no matter where they are right now, no matter where they've been in their lives, no matter what's happened to bring them to where they are now, can be and will be valuable members of society. People who can help fight crime. Simon was because of his network amongst homeless people, he was very quickly able to help me and the police to track down where the burglar was who had assaulted me and who had robbed my home. And so that was an amazing learning curve for me. Homeless people have very good networks. They are the eyes on the street. They see, or you see, things happening that the public don't see because you're there, you're sitting in the street. You talk a lot with members of the public, you talk with each other, you know what's going on. You are an incredibly valuable tool for crime prevention. And so I would like to see Devon and Cornwall Police working more in partnership with you rather than treating you in a different way to how they treat the public. Yes, I'm very aware of issues surrounding your safety when members of the public hate you just because you might be sleeping rough. And therefore, I would like the police to really uphold those initial values of Robert Peel, to extend the hand of friendship to all of the public, and to treat you and to treat issues around your safety just as importantly as for a woman who's attacked when she's walking home wearing the clothes that she wants to wear to make her feel comfortable. Your safety and her safety are equally important, and our police are there to serve all the residents of Devon and Cornwall, whether they live in a tent, in a hostel, whether they live in a bed and breakfast, whether they live in a fantastic project like the one that you are connecting with now. All members of the public deserve the full support and care of our police force. Our police force is made up of some really wonderful officers, but I would like to improve things from where things are now. I'd like to restore the numbers of PCSOs that have been savagely cut by Alison and Hernandez over the last few years, because PCSOs get to know people like yourselves, and they are a great tool in terms of crime prevention. I think I've said enough for now. I'll be really interested to hear your questions. Yeah, I look forward to hearing them.
Thank you, Stuart. And thank you to all of the candidates for very passionate presentations and very informative presentations. So thank you for that. And also a big hello to all the Harbour Housing staff and residents from across Cornwall. It's good to have you with us tonight. We're now moving on to the preset questions, and there are 3 of those. And I will ask them of each individual. So we'll do one question at a time to all 4 candidates. And if in responding to the questions, you allow yourself a couple of minutes to respond. And again, I will look to you guys to manage your time accordingly, if you would, please. So the first question, Alison, are you there? And yeah, good one. The first question is, what are your priorities for policing, please?
Well, the next 3 years, in terms of those priorities, the first one is to increase the visibility of all of this public investment that's happened, both government investment and local people's investment. We've recruiting 498 extra police officers, 317 already through the doors, but they take 3 years to train. And we've been recruiting extra police officers since 2017. So that some of them are just starting to come out the other side of their training. And I think you'll start to see that visibility a lot more, and not just in a car. So what the aim is to ask the Chief Constable, and I've already put it in his contract for this year, which I did in February, that he's got a #1 objective of just increasing that reassurance and public visibility of the police investment that's happened. So that's one. The second one that I'm really keen to do is reopening some of the police station front desks. And the reason for doing that is because, it was particularly in COVID, where we knew there were people without internet access who really could not access some of the services and were struggling. And all of the council front desks closed. In fact, some of them haven't even reopened at all, or hardly at all, or even certainly not fully. And there's an obsession with everything being online and digital. And so I've already reopened Newquay Police Station that closed. St Austell's going to open on a Saturday. I'm trying to create better access so that all people who might need to go and get help can actually go and access police stations. We've still got the 101 number, but do you know what? People sometimes want face-to-face when they're really in distress or don't know what to do. So that's my other really big priority. And the third one, which is I'm really passionate about, because so many of my friends have got dogs, and I'm an adopted mum of a dog who I look after when she's away. Dog theft. So dog theft has been really increased during COVID in particular, but we've got potentially about 20% of dog thefts. We have about 80 a year in Devon and Cornwall, but about 20% of those are linked to organised crime. And we really want to try and stamp this out. We've got to record it better. When you lose a dog, and you know this from your community, all your residents, dogs are why they struggle to even get properties to live in, because they're part of the family and they will not part with them. And so dog theft is another one of my really big priorities around that. So I'll just do my quick 2 minutes on that.
Thank you, Alison, very much indeed for that one. And now we move on to Brian. Brian, would you please give us your priorities?
Yes, certainly, yes.
Yeah, the question is, what are your priorities for policing?
Indeed. As with Alison, I would like to see more people on the streets, and these restoring extra police officers, they're not extra, they're just going back to where we were because of the cuts. And you're never going to get police officers on every street corner. But one thing I was taught when I was in the force is that if you're driving between appointments, then if it's not urgent, you stop your car, you get out, and you do a small foot patrol in that area and speak to people. That seems to be quite achievable. And that would give the reassurance to people and some deterrent effect. The second one is investigation of crime. The HMI, Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, has said there needs to be room for improvement in investigations, and that is essential. The more people you put before the court, the less chance of victims in the future. So investigations and that. Prioritizing offences against women is certainly in my manifesto. And we all in the police force and as public in general have got concerns for vulnerable people, and I hope people in your homes will not consider themselves vulnerable, but perhaps they are on the streets. And vulnerability of people is something the police force should do, whether they're a very small child, through to homeless people or through to elderly people. It is one core function of police to look after people. Those are the three priorities which I would do. There are other things which are in my manifesto, for example, hate crime. And there's been 1,900 recorded cases last year of hate crime in Devon and Cornwall. And again, that is also in my manifesto. You know, I've heard your people speak about being abused in the street. It's a form of hate crime. These people are bullies and they should be confronted, and where the law is appropriate, then prosecuted. So those are my three priorities.
Thank you very much, Brian, for that. And I'll pose the same question, if I may, to Gareth. Hi, Gareth. So, yeah, what please are your priorities for policing?
Well, I touched on one of my big priorities earlier, and that is strong leadership, and strong leadership with integrity. You know, this thing about really looking at the big picture, being honest, being transparent, and being honest about the good stuff and the bad. That's a really big part of my pitch. But the policing priorities, I go down the same route as the first two speakers as well. Getting more officers into the neighbourhood is really, really important. We are still 13% down at the moment from where we were in 2010. We are going to get back to where we were, but it will take time. I want to build back that cadre of specialist officers. I call them PCSOs. They're called that, Police Community Support Officers. These are really effective at the interagency work and all that kind of thing that are particularly important to people from suffering from homelessness, mental health challenges, and that kind of thing. That's priority number one. I'm going to focus on violent crime because it has nearly doubled over the last 4 or 5 years. And yes, it's taken a bit of a downturn during the COVID, but it's a huge, bad thing for our society that we need to wind back on seriously. And much of that violence is related to drug addiction, alcohol abuse, domestic abuse, and all kinds of things like that. It's really important we cut back on that. I also want to reprioritize what you might call the ordinary crimes in the community, to make places like St Austell a better place to live for everybody. And that includes drug taking, that includes antisocial behaviour. It's not what you're trying to solve, it's how you do it that counts. So one of the things I want to do is also put much greater investment in crime prevention, building innovative and effective ways to address the challenges that we've spoken about earlier, the drug addiction, that kind of thing. They're not easy to solve, but they can be solved, and we ought to be investing far more in these preventative services in a sort of public health approach, multi-agency approach. And lastly, a big priority for me is to make sure that everyone in Devon and Cornwall feels they're getting better policing for every pound. Value for money out of policing.
Thank you very much indeed, Gareth. Thank you. And Stuart, if you would please share with us what your priorities are, please, for policing.
Is Stuart muted?
Stuart, can you hear me? You're muted, but mate.
Yeah.
Oh, you're back with us. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I think
You want to rewind and start again, please?
Yeah, I will do. I
Thank
think
you.
somebody muted me. Okay, so I'll start again.
Cheers.
Okay, so I want to echo what Gareth just said. Crime prevention is my #1. And in fact, Bobby Peel said this too. 200 years ago, he said, the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. So I want to reprioritise what is happening at the moment within Devon and Cornwall Force. We spend £5 million each year, too much, on our firearms team. That's not my opinion. That is the police inspectorate who've compared Devon and Cornwall to other similar rural forces. I want to redistribute that money over the 4 years that I would be in office serving you. I want to put more money into the team, the fantastic team who works on domestic abuse and sexual offences. I want to take some of that money and restore the PCSOs that Alison and Hernandez has so savagely cut. If I tell you about one PCSO who died in service down in Falmouth, and virtually the whole town turned out to mark his passing, including some of the people who he'd helped to arrest over the years. So PCSOs are the absolute foundation of crime prevention, and that would be my priority. My other big sort of headlines are more accountability, to set up a listening forum in Truro monthly, and also in Plymouth and Exeter. 5 listening forums each month, one for women, one for people who experience racism, one for all young people aged 13 to 25, one for people who define themselves as LGBTQI or non-binary, and one for anyone else. So you definitely would be eligible for one of those listening forums. So the police listen to the issues that the public are concerned about and respond in terms of how they police us. Secondly, inclusivity. I want to get more women into the force and more women promoted in the force. Only 21% of our sergeants are female. That has to change. I've worked with some fantastic female senior officers. I want to see more women like them policing our streets with sensitivity and tact. Thirdly, environmental impact. You wouldn't be surprised to hear that as a member of the Green Party. And I just want to give you an example of a project that I would so much like to run that links crime prevention with environmental impact. I've been talking to colleagues at Exeter Prison, and they assure me that both themselves and Channings will be very, very keen on participating in this project. Ex-offenders, I don't know if any of you have been inside, but 60% of people who serve short sentences in our prisons reoffend, often going on to reoffend with higher level crimes, more serious crimes than what they first went inside for. I would like to work with nominated ex-offenders when they come out from those 2 prisons and set up a follow-on programme to the horticulture courses which those prisons operate. I want to use police land at Middlemore on the main police headquarters site and set up a mentored allotment scheme so that people coming out of prison can learn to grow their own food. There are employers in Devon who are desperate to employ people with landscaping and horticultural skills. I want to basically
call you to close there, because of time constraints.
That's fine. Sorry about that.
For that. No, not at all. But thank you for that. And now we move on to our second of the 3 questions, and again I'll ask each of the questions of each of you individually. And again, I welcome the management of time. How, Alison, please. Alison, you're with us. I'm always really sure, but I can see your face. Yeah, good. Good, thanks, Alison. How will you ensure lived experience is properly and sensitively utilised, please?
Well, firstly, I've just got a couple of things to add. It's awkward going first because then I can't rebut what other people have saying after me about what I've done.
Closing remarks, mind, don't forget.
So yeah, I'll in my 2 minutes, I'll just mention the reason I'm not talking about violent crime is because I prioritised it 2 years ago, and the council taxpayers are paying £1 million to actually focus on preventing serious violence on our patch. It's a partnership with the Chief Constable, and we're already the 6th lowest crime for violence in the country. So just to be aware of that one. And secondly, it was a police officer that died in Falmouth, where 5,000 people came out for his funeral. And the reason he was so loved, PC Andy Hockin, is because he had a restorative justice approach to his policing. He never arrested people if he could get them to take accountability for it within the community, and he was loved for that purpose. We have many officers like that who do their best to try and instill what Andy Hockin did. But in terms of lived experience, firstly, I visit the prisons. I'm actively involved as chairman of the Criminal Justice Board. I poke my nose in constantly. I get so frustrated by the prisons and their lack of accountability to us about what they're doing with those prisoners who are held there. I am absolutely determined to turn that around. We fight the government on this, I can tell you now. But I've created in Exeter Prison an actual ability for people to get really good help before they leave. And we've had it in Channings Wood, and I've got it in Eastwood Park, the women's prison, so that they're not leaving in the clothes they landed in, so that they have something to do and somewhere to go, and they know what's going on as they leave. I've instilled that one since I've been there. So lived experience is really important to me. And the reason why, absolutely so, is when I visited Eastwood Park and met a prisoner there, Jade, who then told me she's been in and out of prison, and actually she always goes back to drugs, always ends up back on the streets, and always ends up back in prison. And she leaves homeless every single time she's left. So she died 6 months after I left her in that prison. She got released. She went straight back into her ways, and she died of a drugs overdose. And her death has made me absolutely determined to get lived experience people involved in making decisions about how we work with them. So we've set up the lived experience policy, and I'm probably the only commissioner in the country that has not subcontracted it to another organisation to manage those people for me. I have said to my team, you will individually work with those lived experience people to improve your understanding of those things that are happening to those people. I don't want a third sector organisation being the advocate on their behalf. They will speak to us direct. So a lived experience policy has been set up, and we've had some really good successes on specifically domestic abuse schemes that we've been doing. The favourite one from her was, why on earth are you never targeting any communication at the perpetrator? It's always focused on the victim. You know, simple things that we know, but it takes somebody with lived experience to poke us in the face and make us change what we're doing.
Thank you, Alison. Thanks very much indeed. And now we move across to Brian. Brian, thank you. Again, how will you please ensure lived experience is properly and sensibly utilised?
Well, I've attended conferences in the past, police conferences, and it was a fairly new concept where we had people in who'd been through the drug problem and have come out the other side. And they talked to us about the reasons they got onto drugs, the struggle they had to get off them, what experience, what support they had to do so. And back then it was fairly limited. Going back to homelessness, I would think a very good scheme would be to have homeless people come and talk at police training centres about their problems, how they've got there, what their life is like. And goodness knows, I cannot imagine what it must be like to be homeless. And your people will tell me a variety of reasons. People who struggle with alcohol abuse and drug abuse, these need to be communicated firsthand to police officers who don't suffer from these things. They see it, sure enough, but they don't really understand it unless it's explained to them by people going through these problems. The same with domestic dispute, domestic violence and things of that nature. So I think to follow on with the theme is that their experience is useful in the training of police officers, and that is something that I would encourage.
Thank you, Brian, very much indeed. And now that we're across to Gareth. Gareth, again, how will you please ensure lived experience is properly and sensitively utilised?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Yeah, well, I know this is not, a prime example of the challenges, but I saw that YouTube video that showed residents from Harbour Housing suffering abuse and harassment from people in the town, and it was a relatively minor example of lived experience, but I think it was appalling. I was shocked by it. It is wrong. It's intimidating to you and can only harm your struggle back, rebuilding your lives from what are obviously much more challenging experiences. And of course, it applies much more universally and widely across all policing challenges. You know, understanding the impacts of care homes on children's lives, understanding the behaviours against young girls and women in response to sexual violence, etc. Understanding what it's like to be Black or from an ethnic or religious minority, or even perhaps living on their own and slipping into dementia. All these are things that really affect the way people, you know, handle the challenges they face in their lives. But to get to the question about policing, the answer is, in my view, policing and crime prevention can't be done by the police alone. That's why I want to double investment, a really big change to investing in crime prevention and other innovative ways of doing things for the police, to ensure that the right people, well, part of that would include that ensuring that the right people are on hand to support not only the police, but also the criminal justice service. So, you know, more access and easier access to mental health professionals, interpreters, people from disadvantaged communities, drug addicts, and the like, which we've heard of earlier. To take this seriously too, not just pay lip service to it, and not just tick boxes to say that we've done it. We've really got to take this seriously. We've got to start building on that culture change in policing through training police officers better, through better recruitment of more diverse communities into the police, and to broaden the basis of community volunteers that support policing as well, to all help getting this lived experience thing into the heart of policing. In short, listen to people, listen carefully to people, think about what they're saying, and act with integrity in response to what you learn from those people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And sorry, Gareth. And now we move on to Stuart. Apologies for that, Gareth. Over to you, Stuart. And you're not muted, I hope.
Okay, I don't think so.
No, you're not. Well done.
Good. So I want to echo what Gareth has just said. I would be above all a listening police and crime commissioner. I've learned so much from homeless people over the years that I've been a volunteer in projects. Listen to some amazing stories. Listen to people talking about how they have literally walked from the north of England down to Devon, and they're on their way to Cornwall, and they are walking to Cornwall because that's where they want to be. My prime concern would be to listen to stories about how your safety has been compromised by the actions of the public. I'd like to understand what it's like to be kicked, to be sat upon, because people hate you, not because of anything that you've done, not that they know you, but just because you are on the street. That is a hate crime. Hate crimes have gone through the roof in Devon and Cornwall since 2016, since the Brexit referendum. It seems to have given some people license to express their views in a way that they didn't before then. So we're in a bad situation in Devon and Cornwall. There is far more hate crime than there was, and hate crimes against yourselves I find particularly despicable. So I also want to hear your solutions, because I know that you look after one another as much as you can. I want to hear your ideas on how to keep people who are rough sleepers safe, people who are living in tents, how we can keep them safe, so that we can work as a partnership, the police officers, the police civilian staff who man the 999 lines, and also yourselves, to get your ideas on how we can improve the safety of everybody who either lives on our streets or who lives in our villages and towns across Cornwall and Devon. So I'd like to listen a lot more.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you all four candidates for your responses to question 2. Now we come on to question 3 of the 3 preset questions. And Alison, hi Alison, what do you see, please, as the best way to reduce drug harm?
There's so much there. It was 3 years ago, I did the first ever drug practitioner seminar in Torquay for all of the people who are involved in drug treatment across Devon and Cornwall. And I did it, and I brought drug users into the room to actually challenge them. challenge them about their practice, challenge them about their thinking, challenge them about their approach. And it was a really fascinating exercise. We had, and I think there's something around the fact that what we've got to do is get the support for people who are on drugs right. It doesn't seem to be available at the right time. And I fund £500,000 into Cornwall, into the Community Safety Partnership, of which some of that goes towards drug treatment programmes. One of the bits that's frustrated me the most, because you can't deal with everything all of the time and all at once. As you said, what priorities have we got? But drug treatment is an area that does need to be looked at across the whole of Devon and Cornwall. It's commissioned locally in local areas. And so that support is different in each area of what is available. And I still have been absolutely shocked that drug outreach isn't even available in my hometown of Torbay. They don't even do outreach. And they talk about hard to reach groups. I said, they're not hard to reach. You can find most of them quite easily. And one of the biggest issues we've even got drug treatment facilities that are in the biggest drug dealing areas in our patch, which means you come straight out of there and you're not fully feeling safe enough to make the right choices. So there's quite a lot of issues around how we could better support drugs. And I'd like, at the moment, my team, we've just sorted out victim care on a 10-year contract. The next big challenge is looking at drug treatment and how we're funding it and what that service looks like, because we only part fund it, but we want to influence the commissioners at a local level that do. So that's one thing. The second thing for me, and I just witnessed an incident this weekend, a shoplifter in my local Tesco Express, high, absolutely, really not with it at all, high on something, had a massive metal bar in his pocket right across his jogging bottoms, kept fondling the end of it like he was going to take it out. And he was only stealing food, looked really skeletal, looked really ill. And I actually went up to him to say, can I buy your food, until I noticed his weapon. And I walked away, and then I ended up ringing 999, and I've done a witness statement for him. And the really sad thing about that is people in that shop thought that he was going to use violence against them to get what he wanted. And he wasn't, because the subsequent story, which I actually believe, because he was so high, he doesn't recall any of it. He even rode there on a bike and left his bike there. He wasn't being specifically going to rob, and he was going there to get food, and he was just can't remember a single bit of it. And I felt really bad, because he is a prolific offender and he's on drugs and he's not getting the help that he needs, even though he's in the drug treatment program here. And so there's quite a lot of work, I think, to be done in this space. It's not been touched properly, I don't think, for a number of years. And so there is some work to be done there going forward. And I want to use my money through this office, it's taxpayers' money, through the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, as the lever to make that change happen.
Thank you very much, Alison. And Brian, now we move across to you. Again, the same question. What do you see as the best way to reduce drug harm, please?
Well, it's a multi-pronged approach. My grandson is 12 and lives in Germany, and children in Germany see their GP once a year. And part of that consultation is having a lecture on the dangers, the physical and mental dangers of drugs. So education at that age is going to play a very important part in it. There are lots of treatment programs, lots of charities and organizations, including the largest one, the NHS, who are trying to deal with this. But we have a flood of drugs coming into this country and into these two counties. I've seen one or two distressing things in my service, but one of them was a young woman who was 24. I had to go to her post-mortem. She died from a heroin overdose, and she weighed 4 stone. It was a dreadful sight, and this is because people were pushing drugs. She started off on cannabis, which is people consider a low drug, a gateway drug in some cases. And her father and mother told me she then went on to harder drugs, and they couldn't do anything with her, and no one in the treatment programs could do anything with her. So not only as education, treatment and advice to people who get hooked on these things, but enforcement against these crimes. And we've got the county lines, drug lines coming down here, exploiting children to carry drugs. And it's And I know Dawlish in particular, 2 years ago, had a gang settled there from the northeast who were terrorizing parts of the town. They were dealing hard drugs. And the police have really got to get in amongst these people to either disrupt them and prosecute them. And I know it takes place, and I know the difficulties of it. People say, well, why are you targeting users, right? In my time, we didn't target users. We targeted dealers. Users generally got a visit when someone complained about them smoking or things of that nature. And as you know, the police have got to respond to complaints, as it were. But I see the main factor in the drug reduction is education, treatment programs for people in it, and well-funded treatment programs. And this is not a Devon and Cornwall issue. This is a national issue. So those are the three prongs: is education, treatment, and enforcement, which I would see is some way to restoring some sense to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Gareth, hi, over to you. Same question. What do you see, please, as the best way to reduce drug harm?
Thanks a lot. Yeah, well, I've spent, I reckon, more time thinking about during the thinking phase of my campaign sort of, planning process, more time thinking about this than almost any other topic, because I think it does offer great opportunity for improving the way we do business. And indeed, Alison alluded to recognizing that herself. I started off by just acknowledging the ridiculous way that, and anomalous way that we treat cannabis possession and use, noting how we allow a fully legalized alcohol drinking industry to do so much harm throughout our society and cause so much, if you like, load for policing and crime challenges. And I ended up, though, taking that thought process much further forward and being very clear that I believe that the way we deal with drug use is so related to drug harm that it really is outdated, and we need a very careful look at it and find better ways of doing it. A lot of the reason we do what we do, of course, is because of the laws that exist, and that's not the role of a PCC to change that, although we can challenge things. In the meantime, though, we've got to get on with it. So my policy is about being sensible, not soft on drugs. So very clearly to increase targeting of drug gangs, the county lines, etc., and all that kind of thing that we know about. But increasingly to recognise that drug users are very often victims themselves, very often very vulnerable people, and we shouldn't be criminalising them unnecessarily. We should be supporting them and getting them into a better future. So policing and commission services should increasingly prioritise the protection of young people and indeed prioritise addict recovery where we can contribute to that. Reducing the harm today, building a better future for those people, which will make things better in the long term, pending what I believe there should be, which is legislation changes. And I do believe that on one particular point, I think it would be a very sensible thing if police would carry naloxone, a drug, which I know, just as you do here in Harbour Housing, because it can be really useful just simply to save a life at a moment of real tragedy or potential tragedy. Thank you
very much, Gareth. Stuart, over to you now, please.
Hello, can you see me?
Yes, I can now, and I can also hear you. Stuart, same question to you, please. What do you see as the best way to reduce drug harm?
There's no easy answer to this. If there was, we'd have solved it. However, I believe that the first thing we have to do is to work with people who are drug users to help them address the root causes of their addiction. They could be anything. It could be that they're ex-armed forces and that they've got post-traumatic stress disorder. It could be that they lived in care, that they were abused as a young person. There are all sorts of reasons why people are driven to self-medicate. Our NHS drug support services and our mental health services are chronically underfunded after 11 years of Conservative austerity. So as Commissioner, I would do my very best to work closely in partnership with all of those agencies and to look for innovative ways to work efficiently and to make the most of the funding that's available. I would seriously look at a fine example from Middlesbrough, a heroin-assisted treatment centre that has been promoted actually by Cleveland's Police and Crime Commissioner. So they've taken a new approach to heroin treatment, and I believe that there is demand and need here in Devon and Cornwall for a similar service. I would look very seriously at that and visit Cleveland to see what we can learn from them. But above all, I would focus on the vulnerability of drug users. The Green Party believes in legalizing cannabis use in most situations. And part of the reason why we believe that is that we want to take the profit out of drug dealing. And for the countries which have gone down this route and actually set up government licensed sales of certain types of drugs, the price of drugs has fallen considerably. If you take the profit out of drug dealing, you take away some of the violence, the turf wars between gangs, such as we see on the streets of Plymouth. I would come down very, very hard. I would encourage the Chief Constable to come down very, very hard on cases of cuckooing, and to actually devote sufficient officer time to cuckooing, where vulnerable people, maybe people who've been homeless, who've just been given a housing association flat, are then targeted by county lines drug dealers. They're given drugs that they want, but then their flat is taken over and used as a local dealing centre. I think that is entirely abhorrent. And also local cases of modern slavery, where people have targeted drug users who are homeless and have offered them accommodation and employment, but basically are just there to exploit them and to get them to work for virtually nothing. Just, you know, they feed them, they give them drugs, but they keep them in a situation of modern slavery. Again, I think that is totally abhorrent, and I would again promote the police work, the very good police work in Devon and Cornwall that is focusing on modern slavery, and seek to expand the work of those teams while shrinking the work of other teams like the firearms team, which is costing us too much money.
Thank you very much for that, Stuart. I'd like to, at this stage, we've come to the close of the stage of the process whereby the candidates have had the opportunity to respond to the preset questions, and I would like to thank all the candidates for their individual perspectives and their commitment in responding to those questions, which is really appreciated. Now the next stage of the process is where we move on to questions from the floor. And at this stage, I'd like to acknowledge from Harbour Housing, Tim Goth, who has provided a great deal of technical support to this process. And I'm hopeful that that will come into its own for this next stage. So what we've got, and Emily will come into her own as well here. I understand we've got two videos that have come from the residents of Harbour Housing that will pose some very meaningful questions, and also with this stage of the process, we'll give individual candidates the opportunity to respond to the questions. So I asked the question, Emily, are we going to have the videos first, please?
Yes, thank you, Mark. I'll just pop those on now.
Lovely. Okay, folks, wait for it, and thank you for those videos from the people from Harbour Housing.
The biggest problem I find is when you go to St Austell and people obviously see you walking up and down the pavement, they automatically associate you with crime, and you get shouted abuse at a lot. And there's some members of the general public who just don't trust you at all, and also in certain shops.
Thank you. And is there a second video to complement that?
Yep, one more following.
Lovely, thank you.
What can you do to help protect us and the staff from the abuse we get in the street?
Lovely job, very real perspectives, as the candidates will appreciate. And thank you to the Harbour Housing residents that participated in compiling those videos and those questions. So first of all, we ask Alison to respond to those two meaningful videos. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, the first thing is, what I'm concerned about is this is news to me as the current commissioner. That's really disturbed me, that I'm not aware of this. I've actually spoken to the Cornwall commander about what's been going on in the surrounding area, and he's not aware of any particular incidences himself, which then also worries me, because that means the local policing team are not aware. So I think the first thing would be to introduce the local policing team in to speak to some of the residents about what's happening to them. We've got to make sure it's getting reported, and I do hope, and I'm sure the staff at Harbour Housing are very helpful in making sure that information is facilitated. But, you know, it's not to be tolerated. No one has to tolerate any sort of abuse in the street, whatever reason. And I would certainly want to know myself, so I can ask what the local policing team are doing about it. The role of the Police and Crime Commissioner is to understand what's going on in the area, which is why I'm shocked that I'm not aware of it, and actually make sure the police are acting upon community concerns. So that's the first thing in terms of what I would do. I think the second thing is we also have to be aware, and I think Harbour Housing, you've done a really fantastic job of doing positive activity with your residents in the community to show that they are part of the community. They are able to be productive members of the community and should be seen as just like everyone else. However, as I said, like the shoplifting incident on Saturday, this man was dressed filthy, was really skinny, he had a weapon in his pocket, and what we need to do is help people be aware of the impact they make on other people's lives. That's whether that's me, how I might come across, or it's how individuals come across. It's all well and good, isn't it? I'm just being myself. I just want to be me. But do you know what? Sometimes it has an impact on other people. And I think there's a two-way process about understanding how we impact on each other. Because I suspect, as you've noticed, I haven't talked about conservative policies, this and why I'm a conservative. I'm talking about Alison Hernandez as the Police and Crime Commissioner who's been here for 5 years, and what I passionately believe in terms of helping people. And I think for me, my biggest thing is I'm shocked that I didn't already know, Mark. So I think for me, that is the biggest, huge gap in intelligence that I've got that's concerned me particularly.
Thank you, Alison. Brian, this is your opportunity to respond to the two video that we had the privilege of listening to.
Yes, certainly, yeah. I mean, it could be described adequately as bullying, couldn't it? And I would wonder if, when the questions come, whether or not your residents who are in around the streets of St. Austell, how many police officers they see in the streets around, police officers patrolling there, which would go some way to reassuring them that they're not being shouted at and bullied. When I was stationed in St. Austell, there was a motorcycle gang called the Scorpio who used to go around intimidating people. And I think I've heard or read somewhere that you're getting this from another motorcycle gang. Well, they were dealt with robustly because the shifts I turned out had at least a sergeant and 4 there. And we were able to deal with this. It comes down to protecting people again, and homeless people need protection as much as anyone else. In fact, in some cases, more than somebody else. But you can't do it if you don't have the police stations open, and St. Austell hasn't been open. I'm not sure, Alison might enlighten me, where it's being policed from. And how many policemen there are in the streets. St. Austell's a large town, and it's got a large different population, and people, especially homeless people in the streets, do not deserve to be shouted at. It is, as I've said before, bordering on a hate crime, and it should be dealt with.
Thank you, Brian. Over to you, Gareth, to respond to the two videos, if you would, please.
Thanks. Yeah, well, the videos were very real and very moving, and you know, are clearly demonstrating this whole thing about the lived experience, just in a very small way, but very important and powerful way, that people, you know, some of your residents are suffering from. It's not a party political point I'm making, but I am terribly surprised and shocked myself that Alison finds that this is, you know, she hasn't had any idea of this, didn't know it was happening, because from my perspective, that is happening before all of our eyes as we walk around towns and city centres across Devon and Cornwall. I've seen it myself while I'm out just doing ordinary things. I've also seen it out while I'm going out, fortunately, on experienced patrols with the police. So, you know, it's out there. We do know it's happening, and we do know it's unacceptable. Exactly right. It's a form of discrimination. These people need help, not harassment, and we should be doing something about it. How are we going to do something about it? Well, that was the other part of the question, indeed linked to the second video. How can you help us? Well, just very, very quickly, from my perspective, there are 3 ways I want to try and do that. One is through better presence in the towns, to make sure that there are, you know, people like PCSOs or other people around that can recognise this happening and stop it happening. Better use of technology in our towns as well. There are lots of you know, ways we can develop better uses of technology, starting off with CCTV. There's stuff we all know about, but much more than that too these days, to try and spot this stuff happening and deal with it. And thirdly, you know, it's that big thing about crime prevention, education, using commission services to educate people better, to coordinate services better, to stop this happening, because it's unfair and unjust to all those that suffer from it.
Thank you, Gareth, very much indeed. Stuart, over to you, please, to respond to the videos.
Well, yeah, I'm not surprised either. This happens. I've seen it happen here in Exeter as well, and I'm very sorry that you have to put up with that. This is hate crime. This is as serious a hate crime as hate crime that's based on the colour of somebody's skin, and it's unacceptable. Even if, as Commissioner, I was able to restore the numbers of PCSOs back to where they were in 2016, there are never sufficient police officers to witness what goes on. So to some extent, the solution goes right back to Bobby Peel, who basically just said, the police are the public and the public are the police. The police are only members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to the duties which fall upon all citizens. So actually part of the solution is the bystanders, the average residents of St Austell, the type of residents who wouldn't lay into you, who wouldn't abuse you, but who might cross the street or just turn away when they hear that going on. And I believe that that is the key to crime prevention, to work in partnership with everybody, so that everybody stands up for those who are vulnerable in society. If I heard somebody being called a racial term in the street, I would stop and I would go over and I would make my voice known. I would say, that language makes me ashamed to be British, and I don't want to hear that in the streets of Exeter. Not everyone's got the confidence to do that, but when members of the public intervene safely, it can make a difference. First of all, it can make yourself feel supported, but sometimes it can make the perpetrator of the abuse back off. Going back to PCSOs though, if we have a sufficient number of PCSOs, they get to know families over many, many years. They work closely with teenagers in our secondary schools and with our college students as well. If it's young people, if it's teenagers who are abusing you, part of the answer is PCSOs visiting schools and trying to identify who it is who is doing this to you, and helping young people to learn that you are all valuable members of society. You are all somebody's daughter, you are all somebody's son, and you have the right to walk down the street and to use the local shops as much as anyone without any prejudice based on where you happen to be living at the moment.
Thank you very, very much, Stuart, for that. Now, I'm just doing a rain check on time, if I may. I'm mindful that we are utilising the time very, very well, which is a very positive thing. I've got a question that's just come in to me that I'm going to ask on behalf of the person from the floor. But then we're likely to move then to giving the candidates the opportunity to share their closing remarks. And exercising chairperson's prerogative, I'm just going to turn things upside down for that stage of the process, so that Stuart isn't coming last each time and Alison first. I'm going to reverse the order. So Stuart, you'll be first to do your summing up, and then we'll finish with Alison. So I hope that's acceptable to you all. But that, and yeah, that's how it is. And so and also for the people that, and thank you again for those videos that we really appreciate. the videos, and because it makes things so real and the participation. But also I'm mindful that there will be questions from the floor that people think, well, I would have asked that question, but I can't. What I'm going to say is, Chair, and I hope this is okay with Emily and Cicely, that that if there are questions that we couldn't put to the candidates tonight, we will make sure that the candidates see those questions so that you're aware of these are the things that matter to the people that are participating tonight. So that's one thing we will do. And Emily, are you okay with that?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll make sure those are passed on.
Yeah, good. That's lovely. So the final question to all the candidates tonight is, what would you like to see? And this has come from the floor. What would you like to see done differently by the police in response to victims and survivors in response to domestic abuse? So if we could start with Alison, you're first again on this occasion. So yeah, so what would you like to see done differently in response to victims and survivors of domestic abuse?
Well, there's a few things. There's the fact that at the moment there's a huge movement about trauma-informed approaches to all sorts of services, but actually starting to see people through the lens of their experiences rather than what they're just presenting today in front of people. And the trauma-informed approach is very much a big movement in Plymouth. And part of our whole serious violence approach is to make sure that we're looking at everything through a trauma-informed lens. In fact, the force at the moment are just finalising something called the Vulnerability Command. And they are very clear already, and already do this, at very proactive policing on some of our most vulnerable individuals to ensure that they're okay. They ensure that they're not being exploited, and they ensure that they're okay, and they actually do some really proactive policing in that space. I think in terms of specifically domestic abuse, some of the challenges that we've got is obviously that victims don't take things through to the criminal justice process and they drop out. And one of the challenges of that, and this is me talking as a victim of domestic abuse and stalking as well, didn't want to ring the police, didn't want to involve the police. And it's partly part of the challenge we've got. It's not because we think it's the wrong thing to do. It's because it's still got a stigma that it's embarrassing to be a victim of some of these crimes. That the fact is that not that people won't believe you, but the fact that you are going to be reporting somebody you know well, that is someone you love potentially, and you're going to try and sort it out. And it's a really challenging area. So I think there's a lot of support from the police for victims of domestic abuse. We actually trialled last summer a domestic abuse car that went out in a range of different areas with third sector organisations like First Light, who actually sat by a response officer in a car and went out to domestic abuse incidences, particularly with ones where we know they haven't wanted to support a criminal justice process, repeat victims. And it's really helped some of them take those things forward by having someone other than a police officer to speak to at that moment of time. So there's some changes that we've already trialling at the moment. And I think these are the things that we need to be doing, is much more work in partnership. It can't be left just to the police to try and deal with, because it's too difficult and they've got a different job to be doing. We need to be working much more in partnership like that, where we're trying to help people at the point at which it's happening to them and do the best that we can. And really great trial, the domestic abuse car.
Thank you, Alison. And now we come to Brian. Brian, would you please respond to the question, what would you like to see done differently in response to victims and survivors to domestic abuse?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I've dealt with it. I've been there when it's just finished, and in some cases just going on. And there's a whole range of things that coppers got to sort out. Most importantly, if there are children in the house and things of that nature, and then if the person doesn't want to make a complaint, they should be referred to a victim support unit. And that has grown considerably since I was involved in that sort of thing. So the other thing I would say, there was a proposal that if the complainant doesn't want to make a formal statement about this, which could lead to a court, then I understand there was some legislation to be brought forward where that would not be considered, and that person would be arrested and put before a court, and it would then to the court to decide what we do. Now that would start solving some problems, especially where you've got the complainant for a variety of reasons not wishing to proceed, and especially those where there's considerable injury being caused to the person. So that's something I would like to change, but again, that's out of the remit, not only of the Devon and Cornwall Police or Crime Commissioner, that is something which should be taken up by members of Parliament. Yes, of course, police have been to these incidents ad infinitum, but I think the biggest problem they've always had probably is the support for the person afterwards and the person's family. And I think everyone understands how complex this is.
Thank you, Brian, very much indeed. Stuart, or Gareth rather. Gareth, hi. Gareth, what would your response be to what would you like to see done?
Just say a few things. I think we need to really work on the criminal justice system side of it as much as anything else, you know, getting these prosecutions more effectively, more speedily brought through, with possibly a degree of fast tracking in these particular cases. We need to get on with that. We need to treat the offences more seriously, I think. You know, the question, why is violence, for example, conducted in the home treated less seriously in terms of sentencing than violence that takes place elsewhere? So get that right. Let's get some stronger sentences for these kind of offences. Making it fairer and easier to access domestic abuse support services, very much in the hands of the Police and Crime Commissioner to directly affect that of course, which is good. And on behalf of the future, you know, work on the education side, you know, really, you know, understand what is causing people to get involved in domestic violence and domestic abuse, and to start to address it in the root cause. It's a very difficult challenge. It's been very endemic, and there's a lot of it.
Thank you very much. Are you there?
Hello.
Yeah. Again, what would how would you respond to? What would you like to see differently in response to?
It's really hard to do this in 2 minutes, but I'll try. I've got a friend who works for Somerset and Avon and Somerset Force. He works non-stop, full-time, with former sexual offenders who have offended against their partners. He works with them on release. He works with them to try and help them falling back into the same old ways. That sort of crime prevention work is completely the foundation of everything the Green Party stands for. In terms of supporting victims, COVID has been a huge issue in this area, because women and men and male victims who came forward to report domestic abuse back in 2018 are still waiting for their day in court. COVID has impacted on the already very slow processes of CPS. So what I would do as Police and Crime Commissioner is to, again, try and move staffing resources over a 2 or 3 year period, so that we have a bigger team working to liaise with CPS to try and speed up the incredibly slow wheels of criminal justice. I would also increase the number of staff working in the excellent SODATE team, so working with victims of domestic abuse, so that there can be more proactive visits. You know, already we've got officers who go around just to check up on a person who has repeatedly reported domestic abuse. And we need more people to be able to go around and do those unannounced visits. We also could do with those who have successfully escaped situations of abuse coming in to be part of our initial officer training program. We have an excellent training program for new recruits, but I don't believe, certainly when I worked for the force, that wasn't an element as part of it. It would be really good to have people who've escaped, maybe those who've benefited from women's refuge support and gone on to rebuild their lives, to come in to offer new officers in training ideas and to answer questions, so that officers can understand more what it's like to be manipulated by a partner who 1 minute is beating you and the next minute is saying that they're sorry, that they love you and it won't happen again. So you know, there's no easy answers there, but I realise it is a huge issue, and it takes up about 25% of our officers' time for obvious reasons.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Candidates, if I may just have your counsel a minute, you can look at this in whatever way you wish. I've failed abysmally with my chairing time, or we've accommodated. We thought we were initially going to be 3 candidates. And we've had benefit and blessed with 4 tonight, so it's a very positive thing. But as a consequence, we're going to go over time a little if we continue as planned. What I'm asking you as candidates, are you able to continue to engage with this process for a little longer? And that's the question, please. If I can take you in turn, Alison, are you okay with that or not?
I've got to leave at 6:40.
Right. Okay. So I think we've got to be mindful of that, and I think everyone needs to be part of. Okay, that's Alison. So perhaps you'll need to go first with your summing up, despite my my wish to give you the option to go last. And then so, because we do have a question from a client from the floor, and I think it's going to be very difficult to give everyone the opportunity to fully respond to that, in addition to achieving summing up, because each candidate's got the opportunity at the end of the presentation to to summarize. So what I suggest is, if the resident is willing and able to ask the question, and then at least the candidates will get to hear it from the resident. And I apologise to the resident for not giving time for the for a full response, but I think that's just how it is because of the time frame we're working within. So is that something that is okay, that the question can be asked and then the candidates can hear it, and maybe as they sum up, they could perhaps, if able, to incorporate some form of response into that brief summing up. So Emily, over to you. What do you think?
Yep, I'll just hand over to the residents live at Cosgarn Hall.
Okay, over to the residents at Cosgarn Hall live.
Hi there. So I'm
Good evening to you.
Evening. I'm Tom. I'm a staff member here, and we've got Di and Jamie. I think Di's got a question. If I can just let him fire away.
All right. And Di, before we start, thank you in anticipation of your question. It's going to be asked, and there won't be the opportunity for people to respond fully, but they will hear your question. Okay. Thank you.
How do you plan to ensure that the voice and opinions of homeless people throughout the constituency will be heard over the next 3 years?
Okay, do candidates hear the question? Would you be willing to repeat that one more time, please, so they can fully?
How do you plan to ensure that the voice and opinions of homeless people throughout the constituency will be heard over the next 3 years? Okie dokie,
thank you very much for that. Super job.
And I believe one more question from Meg.
Okay, Meg.
Hello, so I've got a question on behalf of a lady called Angie. She has said, having been an ex-prisoner at Eastwood Park in 2017, I watched women become clean and focused on having their children back, being told that upon release they'll be returning into the same supported accommodation or hostel that they were in prior to their prison sentence. They were left devastated knowing that they're back in the same situation that led them to go to prison, feeling set up to fail afterwards. What would you seek to change for these prisoners?
Also, because it was when I was in Eastwood Park, it was phenomenally wonderful with how they took care of people and taught people about different skills in life, different ways to cope with things. But then when they were told 2 or 3 days prior that they would be put back in that situation, and they cried for the whole of those days. I'm asking this to the lady, really, because she likes to mention Eastwood Park. Why are you focusing on the inside when the inside is good? It's getting them out to a safer place.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for some really important messages there and questions. And candidates, you may wish to respond to those individual questions outside of this process? And if so, Emily is your person, then we'll make sure that's fed back to the people that participated tonight. So we're now going to move into the final stages of the process, and I'm using my chair's prerogative to reverse my former decision so that Alison can leave on time. But before we get there, I will do the sort of the rounding off before people begin to disperse. Some people may begin to leave very soon and have to leave. But I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone that's participated tonight in whatever shape or form, and also to the individual candidates. Your perspectives have been rich and varied, but your passion and commitment to this process tonight has been well received and well respected. So we thank you for that. And also, he's going to hate me for this, but there's a guy called Malcolm who is the Chief Operating Officer for Harbour Housing, and it's down to Malcolm's leadership that events like this take place. And I thank him, and he can tell me what he thinks of me having said this off air later on if he wishes. So so now we come to summing up, and if you could make it concise and meaningful, and we will start with Alison, please.
Thank you. And I suppose the bit for me is with those couple of questions is, and I suppose I'm maybe not being as articulate as I could be this evening. One of the things I'm absolutely clear on, actually, and this is for Angie's point, is women offenders, in my view, are the least heard in our community of all of our community. They have the worst service when they come out of prison than anyone else. There isn't even a bail hostel in Devon and Cornwall. I've been fighting for one for the last few years, and we're hoping we might get a residential centre here. We've got a bid together. I work across the whole of the Southwest with all of the police and crime commissioners to tackle some of these issues about housing. This is what my space has gone into. Police is one thing, crime is another, but housing is the fundamental driver of a lot of the problems we've got in our society. And then not just the housing, it's the support that they need with it. So that's why I've gone into the space of building homes and testing it out and seeing if we can do it to make it affordable, to actually try and kickstart a catalyst of change in the way that we help house people, particularly those who are coming out of prison. I've paid for funding to fund housing for people coming out of prison through the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Julian House is the organisation I've funded in particular, who helps get people into properties with that support as they're leaving prison. And it's absolutely devastating. And I think the public would be disgusted and shocked at the fact that there isn't these services available for people. They believe they're paying their taxes to the government, paying their taxes in council tax, and they can't believe that there isn't the services available. That's why the blame comes onto the community, the sorts of people like yourselves who are involved in places like Harbour Housing. They get the blame because the public think it's funded and you're not taking it up. And that's the narrative we need to change with the next term of Police and Crime Commissioner, in my view. We need to help them understand it is so complicated, even I don't know it. And I don't know it because it's so complicated in each area. And sometimes you can get it and sometimes you can't. And that's not right, because if I don't understand it, you won't understand it. And so we've got to try and fix that particular problem, because the community are on your side. The community want people like you to achieve. The community want you to get the help you need. And what we've got to do is I need your voice to help fight for that. And you need to nag the next Police and Crime Commissioner. You need to email them, ring them, poke me, get Mark to get my mobile number, drag me down there. That's the sort of thing you need to do, to be in the face all the time, in the ear of the Commissioner, to try and change some of these things. And I'm more than happy to do that. One of the things I was just going to say is I work very closely with a coordinator in each of the prisons. Our office funds some of those things, and we're really determined to solve that housing problem post-prison. And for you who might well be street homeless, the amount of investment that's in mental health, you can talk about what the government might have done, but there's been a huge investment. We're almost at the point of 111 being able to answer for 24/7 mental health support for ambulances, mental health ambulances. It's got to stop that the police are the ones who come to help people in a crisis. They aren't the right people all the time. So I'm looking forward to seeing what I can do with you if I get re-elected on the 6th of May.
Thank you, Alison. And on behalf of Harbour Housing, I wish you well with your campaign. Well. Hi, Brian.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Your closing remarks, please, sir.
Yes, well, clearly the police have moved on a lot and they're more or less a community safety net, which is no bad thing. But what is not reflected in this is the funding to support it. As Alison says, we support mental health problems, domestic violence, supervising offenders and homelessness where we can, which is fine, but there's not been the funding to come with this. And that is a big problem. In response to Angie's problem about the release from prison, my understanding is it's a probation service issue as to how people who come out of prison have opportunities, a probation service, and that has been cut. Domestic violence going to court, the courts have been cut. So the whole thing, the whole central point of this is the funding issue, which I would say the people to take it up with are your local MPs, because they're the ones who vote in Parliament for these various bills and things which go through on funding. And they're the ones whose responsibility it is for funding. And I've heard nothing from our local MPs as to what they say about funding for the criminal justice system, which includes support for homeless people. As I said, I work in St Austell, and it is a town which is diverse and large, but you really do need, in a town that size, police officers on the streets where they can afford some protection to vulnerable people. And if you don't mind me saying so, yourselves included in that. So that's my message, is that you need to press the government for more funding to get these issues resolved. And that is it. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Brian. And likewise, on behalf of Harbour Housing, I wish you well with your campaign, and thank you so much for your participation tonight. Go across now to Gareth. Thank you, Gareth.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, well, it has been a great pleasure listening to comments and questions coming through from all of the team here, and that's fantastic. Thanks. So, but I do want to just touch on those two questions that came in at the end. First one from Di. Obviously, I think the important thing here, it's going to be very difficult for any PCC to engage with everybody, but it's important that I will need to be, as a future PCC, very proactive in making sure I connect with the right people. And if you can be proactive too and get onto me, as Alison said, that would be brilliant. Thanks. I will need to establish where there is that real need to take different action, to take new innovative action, and make sure we understand that properly before doing it. On the other point raised by Angie, yes, and this is a really important thing about the PCC role. People often sometimes wonder why it exists. It's not just about, in fact, it's far from about leading policing, because that is the role of the Chief Constable, but it is about leading political initiatives and grabbing the big political challenges that are holding back on effective policing and crime prevention and community safety. And this is one example of them. So this is where that PCC, someone like me, hopefully will need to do the right thing, push the right buttons, talk to the right people to make sure we start to build those solutions, for example, on housing post custody. It's a really powerful part of the role, which is as yet unexplored fully, I think. On the bigger sort of the final closing remarks, thank you for talking to me, everybody. The circumstances you find yourselves in and improving those circumstances are indeed, as I said at the start, why I came into politics as much as anything else. So if I'm elected on May the 6th, the truth is I will have a very complex portfolio and there will be demands from every side. But as I said to you tonight, your voices and your linked experiences that I've heard about have as much right to be heard as anybody else's, and I will stick to my word on that one. I want to lead policing and crime prevention and those bigger political challenges with integrity, as I've said. Thanks to everyone that's helped me out tonight, and I'll leave you to make your choices on the ballot paper.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank once again on behalf of Harbour Housing, I wish you well with the campaign, and thank you for your participation and contribution tonight.
Thank you.
Now we go across to Stuart. Hi, Stuart.
Hello, I'm going to try and deal with the questions in reverse order. So first of all, PMS. Yeah, the situation you described of being lured in by two people who basically took advantage of you reminds me very much of the cuckooing situation I was trying to describe earlier. What I can say is that Devon and Cornwall Police have had reasonably good recent training on working with people with learning difficulties, including people on the autistic spectrum. And all I can say is that maybe that needs to improve further so that police officers can begin to recognise the signs of someone who's being exploited and somebody who's not fully understanding what they are being lured into. So thank you for raising that question. Angie, routes out of offending. I sincerely believe that what the PCC, what the Police and Crime Commissioner can do is to work in innovative ways to give people coming out of prison real chances of employment, because if you can get employment, then you can pay for your own housing. So I just wanted to say a little bit more about, I was cut off earlier because I rambled on, but basically my allotment project idea, using spare land at Middlemore, which is just grass at the moment, using police volunteers and other police staff to teach ex-offenders how to grow their own vegetables. That could lead not only into jobs with local employers who want to employ people who can do landscaping and other gardening, but also drawing on a fantastic project in Lincolnshire, which I visited, helping people learn how to cook their own food, which can obviously in normal times lead to jobs chefing in pubs and restaurants. So I would be really interested to listen to ex-offenders to think about innovative ways to help people break the cycle of falling back into the same old crowd, the same old ways, by giving them a fresh start. And I believe that routes into employment is something that the police can help with, as well as using unused land, police land. And then finally, Di. I'm going to disagree with Gareth for the first time this evening. I believe that there is a way forward so that the police can listen in a structured way to everybody. So that's why I've come up with this idea of a monthly listening forum. One of them would be in Truro, but for those of you unable to get to Truro, you would be able to access these forums online. Every month, a senior police officer would be there to listen to anything that you wanted to raise. So that would be for all people currently living rough who'd be able to access through their mobile phones, people living in supported accommodation, people who've recently moved into their own accommodation and beginning to become independent. Whoever would be able to access those monthly forums and raise whatever issues you want the police to hear. I just want to end by saying the Greens are all about hope. I want to go back to Simon, whose story I started with. Simon is an example for me that is hope. For me, as Police and Crime Commissioner, it's not about where you come from. It's about where you are going, what you're going to do with the remaining years of your life. What can you make of yourself? What future can you build for yourself? Simon is an example for me. He's now living independently. He's now making a success of his life, and he's put on weight. He looks younger than he used to when he was living on the streets. There is hope. There is rehabilitation, and the Greens totally believe in that. We think that the way policing and crime is approached, the whole model is broken. We need to put more effort into rehabilitating ex-offenders and also crime prevention, rather than just reacting after crime has happened. I'm going to stop there, but thank you for listening, and I hope you consider voting Green.
Stuart, once again, on behalf of Harbour Housing, thank you for your contributions and participation tonight, and I wish you well with your continued campaign. So thank you all for being part of tonight's process. The fact that Harbour Housing has been part of this very important selection process and candidate process is so very, very positive, and we hope we get to hear who's been successful the first opportunity, and we can be assured that Harbour Housing will work constructively with whoever that person may be. So I wish you all a very good evening, And thank you again for tonight's participation. Bye-bye.